something in there and he becomes a blue Slaad. But in case it's 3rd level or higher.
What do you got going on over there, Pruitt?
I was reading the Monsters Manual and just reading about Death Slaad. I don't know where Death Slaad comes from because the red Slaad infects the thing and it's a blue Slaad, but if it casts their little spells and it's a green Slaad, it becomes gray and then it eats.
You're gold blooming again, Pruitt.
I don't know.
Well, we're talking about Slaad today on WebDM, and hopefully Pruitt's going to be all right, and hopefully he didn't lose his mind.
Chaotic outsiders, the Slaad.
The Slaad.
What is the agenda of just pure chaos? Is it malice? Or is it just it is?
I mean, I think it just is. I think the minute that we try to ascribe an agenda to beings of pure chaos, we have imposed upon them some kind of purpose and order that they don't deserve. But it raises an interesting question for DMs in that, unlike, say, lawful outsiders like Modrons or Inevitables, where we can kind of wrap our head around what law and order sort of look like and extrapolate to a cosmic level. Mm-hmm. Chaos is one of those where it at this level of concept, it's almost alien. And it's like asking DMs face a similar dilemma when they think of like demons. Like, how do you realistically portray a demon?
Yeah. Chaos and evil.
Chaos and evil to an insane degree. It's similar with I think the Slaad in that, what do they do? Do you come up with a random table if you're going to feature these characters in their game or these creatures in your game, and you just sort of want to know what they're up to at any given moment? They're just as soon they just as soon help you as hinder you, or are they bored and want to do something interesting? Something interesting might be ripping you from limb to limb.
Or having tea.
So you can get into sort of the Malkavian fish folk territory that, for people who remember the vampire stereotype, which is just goofy and wacky for its own sake and sort of doesn't lend itself well, I think, to anything. So I think it's worth for DMs when they're considering having Slaad in their game to think, what do they see as chaos? Yeah. Is it sort of an entropy and breaking down of order? Is it something else? Is it a creative process, a destructive process? And then go from there as to what their Slaad are doing and how what their agenda might be.
Yeah, because I mean, they're probably a little bit past the stage of just being like teenagers smoking cigarettes on the corner, putting A's on things and saying "fuck the government."
Yes.
Right?
They're probably like a step, like a hair's breadth right above that.
Yeah, right above that. Right.
And so I don't know. I've incorporated Slaad into a couple of different Planescape adventures that I've had, and a couple of non-Planescape adventures that I've had. I've had them be sort of agents of more chaotic gods or gods of fate. That the Slaad sort of are useful to them for that purpose. In Planescape games I've run, there's been ones where you've encountered depressed Slaad who just can't seem to get up off this rock. Yeah. And how do you deal with that? Because how
do you entice a chaotically depressed thing to do something?
I would say that the one thing that Slaad have in common and that DMs should encourage is Slaad are deadly. They exist to fight. Yeah. They exist to cause strife and chaos, and in their own society, such as it is, strength is the only thing that matters.
Right.
Can this Slaad beat you up? But then it also leads to some weird things where Planescape sort of says, okay, a group of Slaad come and fight the enemies because they value strength so much, they're not going to gang up on the party. They might line up one at a time to each individually take on the party and see which one of them is the strongest. And so those are the kind of bizarre behaviors that you can expect from Slaad if you want to use them in your campaigns. In terms of just what they can do and who they are, I mean, they're fairly powerful mid-level monsters.
Yeah.
You can use them in the mid-tier and whether they're in groups if they're blues and reds, or in smaller groups or by themselves for the green, gray, and death Slaads.
Yeah.
But they're just an interesting monster, and it's an opportunity for a DM to put a dangerous creature in their game and have it be utterly unpredictable and watch how the players react to it.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes be very fun, and for a creature like a Slaad, it's more plausible than, say, dropping an adult dragon on your second level characters. because that's one of those where it's like, well, is this dragon gonna eat us? Is it not? You know, they might be a little too intimidated to have a role-playing encounter with that creature. The Slaad, they might not be because they don't know what's happening or going on.
Well, and also, hell, the Slaad could be shapeshifted.
The Slaad could be shapeshifted and not even reveal itself to be a creature. Yeah.
And they deal with it for a while.
Right.
So, kind of touched on the different types of Slaad.
Yeah.
Let's just start at the beginning. We talked in the Modron show about cause and effect.
Cause and effect,
Action,
and
reaction.
how sometimes the actions by the Modrons that are designed to promote law and order sometimes have a chaotic byproduct. And in this case, that's Primus in a nutshell. He creates this thing called the Spawning Stone. He wants to turn Limbo into a bastion of law and order. Limbo, of course, being the plane of pure chaos and insanity. You know, chunks of earth and fire and water mixing around in a great big elemental stew pot.
Right.
That powerful minds can shape. He cast this stone into Limbo, and you know, the purpose of it was to bring order to the plane. As an unintended side effect, it started creating these beings known as the Slaad, who are incredibly violent, aggressive, and just sort of gleefully belligerent.
Because what would happen when you bring order to chaos?
To chaos, it would fight back.
You would create something
You would create something.
chaotic.
And so the Spawning Stone is featured heavily in an adventure known as Tales from the Infinite Staircase, which I ran through using the Cypher rule system.
Oh, God.
Which we'll talk about that at some point. And so it's you know, you get to sort of explore around it and witness the birth of these Slaad as they happen, and maybe have an opportunity to take a mind control gem out of one of their brains fairly early on. So that's sort of the background of the Slaad, where they come from. It's not like the devils or the demons, where they're sort of like a much older pedigree in terms of their cosmic origins.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I find it really interesting, and it interplay between the Modron and the Slaad. Slaad kill Modron on sight and hate them and attack them, and so it speaks to this larger cosmic war between chaos and law. But the other thing I find really interesting about Slaad are just how they reproduce and how they make more of themselves.
Yeah.
This is something that whenever you were sort of researching the show, you were kind of struck on as being almost kind of just one of the more disturbing aspects of them.
Well, yeah. I mean, how everything is, there's a weird flow chart you have to make. And I did make one. The initial, like the red Slaad, they slash you.
They slash you.
They lay your little egg in there.
Yep.
How's it going, man?
Yeah.
Now you got a little alien baby.
Now you have a little alien baby.
I love that because, hey, I love aliens. And why not incorporate that aspect into the campaign? You could do a low-level thing where an NPC or whatever gets infected, and you're trying to get this thing out of them before it bursts out of their chest.
And then becomes a
blue or green
Slaad. I like any monster that their wounds on the players leave a lasting impact that a cure spell can't just get rid of.
Exactly.
There's not a lot of that. Certainly compared to older editions where there were more monsters that had, you know, you don't want them touching you. They do things that are worse than hit point damage.
Rot grubs.
Rot grubs, vampires with their negative energy touch, whites, things like that. And Slaad are one of those monsters that have made it through the editions, and yes, they still, do not fight. If you're going to fight these things, you're going to come away scarred.
Yeah.
Now, in keeping with 5th edition's sort of like no permanent damage over here, sort of like after every fight you can heal up and rest, it's fairly easy to get rid of these conditions, but if you throw them at a low enough level party or they're not prepared for it, then you could be faced with a situation where a player's like, I have an alien being growing inside me and it's time to, or I've been infected with the chaos phage and will slowly turn into a red Slaad.
Yeah, because the blue Slaad, which are created from the red, if they hurt you, they can infect you with a disease.
Yes.
And then you turn into a red.
And then you turn into a red. And so there are these monsters that, you know, when they show up, you know, maybe an incursion of Slaad has happened, you know, a death Slaad has gotten a bunch of reds and blues together and they've gone on an incursion, and now there's this string of villages that are dealing with twisted and malformed beings turning into Slaad, and chest bursters and little Slaad tadpoles running around.
Scurrying about.
Just scurrying about, and the players have to come across this scene, figure out what's going on, try to find the source of this problem, all the while dealing with the fact that the more of these there are and the more of them that they spread out, the more of them they create, can very quickly get out of hand.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of thing I like in a monster, and when you even if you're just playing in a campaign and you have like a random encounter with one of them, it can quickly spawn into something much bigger.
Right.
No pun intended. And to really spider web out and to watch the the consequences of having a monster show up in your world. And it's one of the reasons why it's worth reading the flavor text in the monster manual and not just looking at the stats, because it shows you the different ways that you can use these monsters in a larger context. And so I think having that with a Slaad invasion or an incursion is I don't know, really interesting way to play them.
Whether or not you're just you're a fighter,
Yeah.
or you might be a 5th level cleric.
Yeah.
And then guess what? You get a whole new journey ahead of you, son.
You get a whole new journey.
If you have a red Slaad cap you off.
Yeah.
And you're on your way to being a green Slaad.
To being a green Slaad, and then however long that takes before they become a gray, and then they have to eat a death Slaad in order to become a death Slaad themselves, which leads us to the weird.
Where did the death Slaad come from, Jim?
I mean, there's a lot of different answers to that. I don't know that there ever was a first death Slaad. These are beings of pure chaos, and so things like cause and effect, logical consequences, these are things that don't apply to them.
Yeah.
And it could very well be that we have, like you mentioned last night, a bootstrap paradox.
Yeah, like
with the
where did the death Slaad is the Reese?
yeah.
When did the first death Slaad get eaten by some? Was there more than one at first? There had to have been, right?
Maybe.
I mean, the book actually just says they are Slaad infused with negative energy. So if a Slaad accidentally makes it to the negative energy plane, does it turn into a death Slaad?
I mean, that's entirely a possibility. Perhaps, in the roiling chaos that is limbo, occasionally negative energy seeps through and blasts the spawning stone, and a crop of death Slaad are born.
Yeah.
I don't know. I leave that up to individual DMs. What I would encourage individual DMs to do when it comes to Slaad is make it messy, make it weird, and make it so that the players are left scratching their heads, going like, I don't see how that just make them. It's a way to kind of confuse them, and also to play up the fact that these are beings that don't follow the normal laws of anything. I like when we're talking about green Slaad, gray Slaad, and death Slaad, I find that those are where these creatures start getting interesting in terms of being an ongoing antagonist in a campaign.
Oh, most definitely.
So green, gray, and death Slaads are going to be fodder for archmages or liches to summon as bodyguards, to summon as agents, to have bound. First off, it's high-level magic that has to summon these things. We're talking like gate spells to get one of these here, or to find some way to pull that brain that's in its, or that gem that's in its brain out of it so that you can control it.
Right. Well, yeah. Let's move on to that. The control gems. It's an interesting idea to be able to control chaos in some way.
Right.
Because it takes a piece of the stone with it, right?
It takes a piece of the stone with it, and so that the monster manual is a little vague on exactly what you can do with it. I mean, it gives some specifics on how the mind control gem would work, but you maybe can say that there's some sort of like weird magical surgery to get this thing out of its brain, or in keeping with the violent nature of it, maybe you just have to hit it over the head with an axe enough to pull the brain out, remove the crystal that's in the middle of it, and then the Slaad's going to be fine in a few minutes. It'll bounce back or recover or something like that. They're not creatures that are, they're very resilient creatures.
Yeah.
And so that's whatever way the DM decides how they get one of these control gems. They now have a minion who can shapeshift.
Yep.
Who now have a minion who, if we're talking like a death Slaad, who can cast a variety of spells that maybe allow them to impersonate the wizard, or archmage or lich that summon them, thus sowing more confusion and chaos in with the party. I might use one of these to just mess with the party for a few adventures, using Mage Hand and different illusion and effects to just like cause a little bit of strife and chaos in the party's life. Just like pop up out of nowhere, blast a fireball off, flip a middle finger, and then plane shift away. Just something to really. First off, your players are just gonna hate this monster if you do that to them, and you're gonna really build up.
I kind of know what that's like.
Right, when a monster that can plane shift away is a monster that's bound to get the player's ire, and just,
We're coming for you, Razzleson, this weekend, and slam down. We're gonna get it. Sorry,
sorry.
I'm out.
But there's a lot of other things you can do. They're tough. They're big bruisers.
Yeah.
They make good bodyguards for for the Lich or the Archmage to summon them, and their abilities lend themselves well to being someone that kind of messes with a high-level party.
Yeah.
And allows them to just kind of cause a bunch of strife and chaos without necessarily being a deadly threat.
Right. It's green, gray, and death that can all shape change, right?
They can all shape change, and then they all have increasingly powerful spell-like abilities.
Spell-like abilities, but still,
yeah.
any three of those. I mean, if you have something like that at your disposal, like as a wizard, why wouldn't you just have it shape changed into you walking around?
Impersonating
you, maybe drawing the party out if they want to try to take a shot at you, especially if it's a death slot, then it just plane shifts away.
Plane shifts away or shape shifts back into its death slot form, fights for 2 or 3 rounds before leaving. I would say that these are creatures who are, if there's an opportunity to fight, they're going to fight. If there's an opportunity to get their fists bloody, they're going to do that.
Right.
But if there's an opportunity for them to just mess with things, to just stir the pot, to provoke, they're basically like the trolls of the cosmic universe. Yeah, they're just there to push buttons.
Figuratively, not literally.
Not literally, because they're D&D, they're actual
I mean, I
trolls
suppose
there.
they could actually shapeshift into a troll and then be that's a
But
level
that's
of incept. You know what? We're getting off topic.
We're getting off topic.
But this is the chaos induced by Slaad.
They are there to stir the pot, to cause
Yeah.
trouble. And if used in that manner, they can be really rewarding. And then at the end of the day, I don't know, you killed that Archmage, now you got the control of the gym, or maybe the Slaad in the middle of the fight is just like, well, it's more interesting if I turn on my master now. You can do those kinds of things, and first off, keep the party on their toes. You can introduce an interesting NPC that way. Or you can just, I don't know, do something different or weird.
Right.
Or random with the Slaad.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, we've run a few campaigns with Slaad in them, and while one wasn't necessarily D&D, we did fight them and interact with them.
Yeah, I mean, it was, the Cypher game was in D&D in spirit, certainly, and drew upon the D&D lore, and so you fight with them. Then another good portrayal of Slaad that I've seen is there's a Planescape book called Faces of Evil, the Fiends, and one of the chapters, the whole book is written from an in-character perspective, and there's very few rules in the book itself, and one of them is written by a Slaad who sort of like participates in the blood war because he likes eating devils. He just loves to do it. And there's delicacy, there's favorite, and he likes fighting them. And so that's just kind of, he's a belligerent, aggressive, and just takes joy in conflict.
Yeah.
And seeks to stir that conflict up anywhere they can. That's what you get with the Slaad. And I wish there were more chaotic outsiders for DMs to draw on, and the Slaad are certainly a good start. There's a lot you can do with them. They're overall not as powerful as some of the demons and devils and other outsiders, extraplanar creatures that are in the monster manual. But they make a solid tier 2, tier 3 enemy.
Yeah.
And by tier 4, you can have them be bruisers and
The lackeys.
The lackeys. Or you could just be like, here's 20 red and blue Slaad. Like, just
Have fun.
deal with it.
Don't don't end the fight with fucking tadpoles sticking out of every wound. Then you're like Hellboy fighting the Hound there.
Absolutely. Not necessarily
Didn't even buy
being
me a
dead. Bruisers and
Fighting the Hound there.
absolutely.
Then you're like Hellboy.
Absolutely.
There's an episode where the Hound there. Frank Burns is in the mess hall and he's lining up all of the ketchup and lining up all the condiments. So if you look down, it's all one line and it's ketchup, mustard, ketchup, 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 mustard, 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 applesauce, applesauce, applesauce. It's just like
do that all the time waiting tables.
Yeah.
Your section has to be perfect.
you look down and
Before
everything,
you
ketchup
can
is on the
leave.
left and the mustard is on the right. And I take the bottle with my left hand, with my right. It's the way of the future, Jim.
Show me all the blueprints.
All the blue Slaad.